Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to take a look at the often maligned and black sheep of the Metroid family, Metroid Other M. This game is polarizing to say the least. So, dust off your Wii or Wii U, slap in a disc, and let's take a look at Metroid Other M. This game starts off innocently enough with some classical music and pretty nice looking start card, along with a quick recap of the events of Super Metroid. This is actually a really good start since it tells you exactly where you are in the timeline, just after those events and yet before the events of Metroid Fusion. This is fairly important. Sakamoto, the lead director behind the game, took over right around the time of Metroid Fusion and Metroid Zero Mission, both of which came out on the Game Boy Advance and were primarily 2D adventures, with one being a retelling of the original Metroid game, though significantly harder and more accessible at the same time, and Metroid Fusion, a more story-driven, less exploration-focused take on the Metroid franchise. Now, that's not to say that these titles didn't have their fair share of exploration. They did, but each title was an attempt by Sakamoto to make the franchise more appealing to the mainstream market in Japan. Notice I said Japan. Most games around this time, particularly from Japanese companies, were very fixated on hitting their home market of Japan above all other markets. So while Metroid actually had pretty mass appeal outside of Japan, Sakamoto was determined that it was going to have global appeal not only outside of Japan but inside of Japan itself. It's a very Japanese mentality for the 90s, pretty much. That said, think of this more like popularizing Metroid Part 3. He'd already tried it with Zero Mission, and he tried it again with Fusion. Metroid Other M was his third attempt to do so. To do that, he began looking around at various companies that understood his vision of what this Metroid game should look and feel like, and after some deliberation, came to Team Ninja. Yeah, this did not go over well. I mean, Team Ninja was an odd pick at this time because they had only done basically a handful of games up until this point, and none of them looked, felt, or acted anything like Metroid. Game Informer, immediately upon hearing who was going to be developing the game, made an April Fool's cover showcasing Samus in a bikini with her signature blaster and helmet, having a day at the beach. You see, up until this point, Team Ninja was known for 3 games: Dead or Alive, Ninja Gaiden, and Dead or Alive Extreme. Yeah, you can see why people were leery about this team touching the Metroid series. Not surprisingly, the telltale signs of Team Ninja's work was all over this game. Samus was a bit more, sexualized in her Zero suit in the beginning, having closer to a DOA cast member's proportions in most of the early cutscenes. Overall, it's not bad, given you don't see her in the suit through, well, most of the gameplay, quite frankly. Then we start to see the influence the team had on combat in the game as we enter into a training session. This section has Ninja Gaiden written all over it. It almost feels like they took the base combat from Ninja Gaiden, made a few modifications, and dropped it into a new control scheme, and for the most part it works really well. But it has one glaring omission. Why is there no nunchuck? All of the Ninja Gaiden games had been made on the Xbox and PlayStation consoles at the time, and they used almost every single button available. How is this going to work on a game that technically would use more buttons than Ninja Gaiden? The answer is really compromise. Lots and lots of compromise. I mean, the better question is why didn't they use the nunchuck? Pretty much every Wii that was ever sold had a nunchuck with it. And even if you didn't have a Wii and you bought a Wii U, they were still selling Wiimotes and nunchucks around the time that this game came out. The Wii was still on sale along with the Wii U, and they still wanted to sell those peripherals for the Wii U. I mean, at the very least, they could have added an alternative control scheme to the whole thing so that you could have attached the nunchuck and used that to augment the experience. And for those who wanted to play it with the original intent, they could have held it horizontally. Sakamoto decided not to include those. Sakamoto wanted to recreate the simpler control scheme of the 2D Metroids in Metroid Other M by having the player hold the controller sideways. He was convinced this would allow more than just, as he called them, core gamers, to find the game more accessible. In short, he thought the nunchuck was too complicated or intimidating a barrier for most gamers. Weird. What I think the real issue was here is that Sakamoto had been used to working on 2D Metroids, with his work on the original Metroid, then Metroid Fusion, and finally on Zero Mission. His understanding of the series was limited to the 2D space, which is where the majority of Metroid games had taken place. Now, had Retro Studios not launched 3 successful games in the Prime series and pretty much showed us what was capable in the 3D space, pretty much defining how we look at 3D Metroids, this could have been received better. Yeah, not likely. Not likely in the least. I'm not going to harp on this too much. Okay, I probably am. The control scheme in this game is often hampered, for lack of a better word, baffling design and control decisions. These become more and more cumbersome as the game progresses. The basic attack and dodge feel very fluid. However, the mechanic that lets you recover health requires you to switch from holding the controller horizontally to holding it vertically. This is not only how you recover your health in emergency situations, and I stress emergency, it's also how you get more missiles. This not only doesn't work very well, it's insanely frustrating the deeper you get into the game and the more frantic the combat becomes. If you run out of missiles, you simply hold the controller vertically and let the missiles charge. Did I mention you can't dodge or move during this process? You can't. This setup becomes even more confusing when you realize that people have been farming for health and missiles in Metroid games for as long as Metroid games have existed. So why change it now? Again, I think this goes back to popularizing the franchise. In an effort to try to give this entry a more mainstream appeal, they eliminated the need for farming health and missiles in the game, and just worked it into a simple mechanic. The idea being that holding the remote vertical for a few seconds would be more appealing to mainstream audiences than running between rooms farming resources, aka grinding. This also dovetails into a few other confusing design choices, namely missiles and scanning. Missiles can only be used by entering scanning mode. To enter scanning mode, you have to aim the Wiimote at the screen, locate the target, and it will auto-lock. This all sounds simple in theory until you try to use it, and then it kind of leaves you in a bit of a lurch, because not only are you trying to hold the thing horizontally to do everything that you need to do, you have to aim it at the screen to be able to shoot, and if you're like me and your sensor bar is in a weird position or you can't get it in a good position, you're moving from scan mode, out of scan mode, out of scan mode, out of scan mode, and you can't target anything. It just leads to a maddening experience at times. So let's deviate for a second. I had issues with the sensor bar when I went back and played this game, and for the most part I always used my Wii with a different sensor bar. This is the base sensor bar of the Wii. It has 2 small IR receivers on the top, and the placement of the sensor bar can be, well, tricky at times, at least in my house. This meant that playing the game when using the sensor bar, it might incidentally recognize the move to first person, but then it'll pull you back out to a more 2D perspective. This makes an already awkward change in controller position, well, more awkward. Let me introduce you to the Power A Wii Ultra sensor bar. I know, it's kind of a mouthful. This wireless sensor bar uses 4 AA batteries and syncs to your Wii or Wii U the moment you power it on, and will stay on for a duration of roughly 2 hours at a shot. The advantage is, well, size. Look at this thing. Compared to the normal Wii sensor bar, it's huge. It also has adjustments in how wide or narrow the sensor range is. My suggestion is if you can still find one of these, go ahead and buy it, set it to wide range, and leave it there. It's worth having to get up every 2 hours or so to turn the daggum thing on for how much better this solution works compared to the base sensor bar. It removes any sweet spots and makes controlling in this particular game much, much easier, and I just think it's a better sensor bar overall. So I'm going to get off that soapbox now. It's irritating. One of the most frustrating things and maddening things about this game is the control scheme itself and how you have to use it as things get more complicated. It feels almost deliberately manufactured by the fact that it was directed by somebody that didn't have enough experience in a 3D space. If Sekimoto had had more time working in games that were more three-dimensional, or had been a little bit more flexible in talking about the control scheme and what worked and what didn't work, I think this could have been a more simplistic or more streamlined control scheme. I still feel like Team Ninja did the absolute best they could, and they still did a lot of really adventurous stuff with this control scheme, but it just feels deliberately manufactured and convoluted for no reason. This control scheme also leads into some other noticeable issues. When you want to look around the room, you have to actually enter into what they call scanning mode. If you move too far in any direction without holding down the scan button, which is B, it will pull you out of scanning mode. There is no way to situate the camera behind the player. This leaves the player switching between scanning mode and the normal game mode as you try to find secrets and navigate some of the rooms. This choice is mind-boggling. Ever since Mario 64, there has been a way to center the camera behind the player. This is one of the only times I've seen a game that uses this kind of 3D movement and has never had a way to center the camera behind the player. At the very least, that should have been included. Again, I'm going to harp on it again. If you'd added the nunchuck, 99% of these problems would have been resolved. I'm 100% certain of that. The fact that they at least didn't have a way to justify the camera behind you, either with the B button or something, is just mind-boggling. It just confuses me to no end. The next thing we need to talk about in any Metroid game is the exploration, or in this game's case, lack of it. This game, well, it's an action game. That in and of itself is not an issue, it's just not very Metroid, I guess is the best way to put it. At almost every turn of every corner, you run into another seemingly scripted combat scene that unlocks a door or leads to another cutscene. This isn't bad, it just makes it feel a little bit more like God of War or Ninja Gaiden and less like a Metroid game. It's almost like Team Ninja understood the limitations of the control scheme that they were using early on and decided to focus more on the rather smooth combat sections to compensate for the fact that it was difficult to look around and explore the environment you were in with the control scheme that Sakamoto wanted them to implement. So, they leaned back on what they were good at, which is combat set pieces and fluid combat. And man, when those pieces work, this game really clicks. When it comes to the actual exploration and powering up in the game, it's a bit of a mixed bag. You see, the fixed camera angle makes it hard to look around your surroundings effectively. This in turn makes it very easy to overlook openings or find hidden nooks and crannies in the game. It almost feels like it's hurting you at sometimes as well, either pushing you one direction or another. It doesn't really seem to want you to stop and look around, and outside of energy tanks there sadly isn't too much reason to. Let me explain. There are 3 power-ups focused solely on health and health recovery. Energy tanks, energy tank pieces, which work just like heart pieces in Zelda, and E-recovery tanks. Now, E-recovery tanks are new and unique only to this game, and they work in this manner. When you go to refill your missiles and in the emergency situations they let you refill your health, you'll fill up more than just part of your health. You can fill up over a health tank. It's a fairly powerful power-up that suffers from the same issues I stated with this mechanic before. The other 2 are the missile tanks, which are a staple of the series, and another new one, the Excel Charge. The Excel Charge is helpful, but hardly necessary for the game, as it simply lets you charge your blasts more quickly. It will also let you charge up super missiles and power bombs more efficiently. In my humble opinion, the Excel Charge and the recovery tanks are nice, but not super useful in this game. The energy tank parts as well could have gone away, and were really only there to add more time to the game hunting them down. In fact, I think I finished my entire playthrough with 3 to 4 energy tanks total, and there were 9 in the game. All other power-ups are unlocked via the story, which brings us to most people's biggest gripe about this game. Now look, people's hatred for this story is almost legendary at this point. You would think from listening to some of people online, and I know people online are very dramatic, that they had single-handedly in this game destroyed Samus's character forever. They had destroyed her as a heroine, they had completely just ruined how badass she was in this single game. And I don't think for a second that's true. However, it's a really polarizing game, and we're going to go into a few reasons that I think it's probably considered polarizing, and do the pros and cons for each kind of talking point. The first thing that this does is it kind of destroys the preconceived notions that people have about Samus as a character. Let's be honest, after 24 years of seeing this character in action, people have a pretty good beat on who they think Samus is and what she's about. Sakamoto, however, had other ideas. In his own words, he really wanted to determine and express what kind of human Samus Aran is, so that way we can tell what kind of natural steps she will be taking in the future. In short, he wanted to build a personality behind the silent protagonist so he could drive home more story-driven narratives with her moving forward, which is a laudable goal with mixed public reception, primarily because what he saw the character as, or what the Japanese culture sees the character as, isn't really what the Western culture that adopted the character really felt she was, and they felt slighted. To his credit, though, I feel like he did a good job of trying to make her feel and seem more empathetic, more human, a little more relatable with some of the kidding around and things of that nature. So I don't think this was a total miss, just maybe a little more heavy-handed than it needed to be. Here's another one that sometimes people use, is that the story is a little bit sexist. Now, this one's a little bit hard to describe as a guy, but I'll do my best here, because it's partially a valid point, it's partially not when you look at it objectively. Samus, who spends some of her life with the Galactic Federation, is assigned to a platoon of all-male soldiers save her. This leads to a few weird idiosyncrasies that I suspect other women in similar situations have had to deal with. One of which is that she's singled out in a few key ways during the story. The first of which is the nickname Princess, given to her by one of her former teammates. He's the only one that calls her this, and it kind of comes off as a bit brotherly of a gesture, but also singles out her gender and isolates her in a way that's a little bit different from the main group. He doesn't really have nicknames for anyone else in the platoon, just Samus. Likewise, Adam, the platoon's leader, also has similar actions by often saying, "Any objections, lady?" Samus takes note of this reference as both an isolating gesture and a singular call to her opinion as a woman on the matter at hand. They meant it in a positive light in the story, but it's a little jarring and blatant enough that it often comes off as patronizing or even insulting at times to single her out of the group so regularly. They even go one step further in making her seem petulant about it, and by giving a thumbs down instead of giving the usual thumbs up the rest of the group gives for consensus. This honestly doesn't really fit with the character we know now, but this is a much younger Samus, which she even admits she was so young at this point in the story. The third one that people usually bring up is that it removes her independence. And this one's a little bit more debatable, and I kind of argue this one semi-regularly with people when they bring up Other M all the time. Samus is by nature a bounty hunter. She goes where she wants, she does things on her own terms, and she gets paid. She always operates independently, but in every instance of this, she's been on an isolated planet. This time she's neither alone or on a planet, she's on a ship. Given it's a ship under Galactic Federation command and she's operating in conjunction with the military, it makes sense to have a unified command structure. It makes the operation more efficient, and given the issue with the comm traffic, it ensures proper search procedure and communication is upheld, so that in a sense, I don't really see a major issue with this. It just makes sense for them to kind of coordinate in such a manner. One of the last ones that people usually bring up as an argument is that Adam tells her how to use her suit and she would never allow that. Yeah, this one kind of hurts. Out of all the arguments, this is one of the hardest ones to justify, and in some of the cases I can, and in some of the other cases I can't. In this game, the most important game-changing power-ups aren't found like they are in other games, they are just authorized. The reason for this is simply explained as her weapons and arsenal are just too powerful to be used in a joint operation like this without someone making sure other personnel aren't in safe locations before she's allowed to proceed with her use. This both works and falls flat on its face at the same time. As an example, early on in the game, about the same time that you run into her first boss, the use of freeze pistols is allowed, yet Samus is not allowed to use her freeze beam, she's instead allowed to use the missiles for the first time. This is after you take the time to aim with the Wiimote at the screen and scan the boss for the first time. Without this, the cutscene never triggers, and Samus is just left jumping around incapable of doing any damage at all. Another example, and a more damning example, is when you run into the first lava section on the ship. Don't ask me why a ship has a lava section, I don't know, I'm just playing the game. You run through this entire section, and I mean all of it, all the way to the boss before Adam finally goes, "Oh, right, Samus, use your suit's Varia feature to protect yourself from heat." This is one of the first parts I wanted to shove Adam's face into some lava. "Yes, you moron, I've been running around lava for about 40 minutes. Now thank you for finally checking in and gracing me with access to the soul protective gear, you twat." It gets so bad that I think even Team Ninja started laughing at it. Near the end of the game, she even has to get over a bridge and activates her screw attack to a slight mocking, "Any objections, Adam?" to a missing Adam whom she's lost contact with earlier. In short, some of this works, a lot of it doesn't, and after years of working with her team, the team should have been more used to her tactics and how to work with her arsenal in the field, just so that this falls flat. I can't defend this one very well. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. This is a weird one to sum up, because for all the things this game does wrong, and let's be fair, that list is pretty substantial, I still really like this game. I know it doesn't make any sense to me either. It lacks in exploration, its story's a little rough and kind of patronizing, the combat takes heavy precedence over what makes a Metroid game, well, a Metroid game. The props you find are kind of laughable at best or they're helpless, but something makes me like this game. Maybe it's the fact that it's so maligned that I just want to like it. Maybe it's that for all its flaws and issues, there's a good core structure to the Metroid game here. Many of the concepts would make most Metroid games more fun and interactive, from all the combat techniques to even, I dare say it, the investigation sequences. Being able to scan your environment for clues and other information would be a great addition to the exploration facets of any Metroid game. You could even work it into an upgrade structure by having the suit analyze enemy techniques and incorporate them, which would be a new and exciting way to introduce gameplay mechanics in future games. I even like how they tried to humanize a silent protagonist. Most developers won't dare do this kind of thing so late in a franchise, making this one of the few rare times it's been tried to my knowledge. For all its flaws, it shows us a side of the character that we had no viewpoint into before. It shows how she grew into the strong, independent bounty hunter we know now, and for how those former attachments and experiences help build a more disciplined approach that we know her for in all the other games. Oddly enough, I even feel the more sexist story in this game kind of tells its own story. Kind of a story of the daily struggle that a lot of women have fitting in with careers that are more traditionally male-dominated, and how they've had to adjust and try to stand out more to be seen in those. I don't know. Maybe it's just me projecting my rose-colored glasses on the game. I don't know. What do you guys think though? Do you like this one? Do you hate it? Let me know in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to hit the like button and the subscribe button as well. And as always, till next time, happy gaming.